but none were as feared as the Gorytheans. They were strong, ruthless, and proud. The Gorythean king ruled with an iron fist, his name whispered with both respect and fear. His daughter, Princess Lysara, was said to be the most beautiful and intelligent of all the royal bloodlines. Every kingdom desired her hand in marriage. But the king had made it clear his daughter's future husband must prove his worth for years. The king had set a challenge, one that no suitor had ever been able to complete. The winner would marry his daughter. The challenge was simple but cruel, a series of trials, each harder than the last, designed to test the strength, wit, and heart of any who sought to claim Lysara's hand. Yet, every man who stepped forward was defeated, humiliated, or broken. No one had ever succeeded. The king believed that no one, especially a human, could ever rise to the challenge. Humans were weak in his eyes, small and unworthy of his daughter. Damn. He laughed at the very thought of one even trying. His confidence in the power of the Gorythean race had never been shaken. That was until a human named Jack entered the arena. Jack was a former soldier from Earth, a place that had long since faded into the depths of space. He was no king, no, noble, but his heart burned with a fire that few could understand. He had come to the Gorythean system seeking a new life, looking to escape the ghosts of his past. But when he heard of the challenge, something stirred deep inside him. He had always been a fighter, not just for survival, but for what he believed was right. The idea of taking on a king, of facing impossible odds, was something that he couldn't ignore. As he entered the palace, the crowd watched in stunned silence. The Gorythean king eyed him with amusement, his massive form sitting proudly upon his throne. The alien species surrounding them looked at the human with disbelief. The thought of someone like Jack facing the trials seemed ridiculous. The king sneered, his voice booming. "You think you can succeed where so many others have failed?" Jack stood tall, his posture strong, but his face calm. "I'm not here to prove anything to anyone," he said simply, his eyes meeting the king's. "I'm here because you said it couldn't be done. I'm here to show that humans can do what you think is impossible." The king chuckled, clearly entertained by the human's confidence. "Very well, you will face the trials, but don't think for a moment that you will win. The first trial begins now." The crowd parted, revealing a large arena. The first trial would test Jack's strength. It was a battle against Gorythean soldiers, trained warriors whose bodies were made for combat. They were faster, stronger, and more skilled than any human could hope to be. It was the kind of challenge that had broken even the most confident of competitors. The king's laughter echoed in the arena. As Jack was handed a weapon, a simple sword that seemed laughable compared to the heavy armaments the Gorytheans wielded. "May begin," the king declared. The battle started quickly. Jack was fast, using his agility and instincts to avoid the blows of the Gorythean soldiers. He moved with precision, dodging, countering, and striking when he could. But no matter how hard he fought, he could not match the Gorytheans in strength. One soldier knocked him to the ground, and the crowd gasped. For a moment, it seemed like Jack's challenge was over. But he didn't give up. His mind raced, calculating his next move. He used the environment around him, leveraging the walls and pillars of the arena to his advantage. The Gorytheans, while powerful, were not used to the tactics of a human soldier, and Jack knew how to outthink them. With one final move, he managed to disarm his opponent and force him to the ground. The arena went silent as the last soldier stood before Jack, panting and beaten. Jack stood victorious, bloodied but unbowed. King was quiet, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he was unsure of what to make of this human. "You've won the first trial," the king said, his voice tight. "But don't think for a moment that this is over. The next trial will be more difficult." Jack nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'm ready." As Jack prepared for the next trial, Princess Lysara watched from the balcony above. She had seen countless suitors try and fail, but something about Jack intrigued her. He wasn't like the others. There was something different about him, his determination, his strength of character. He was more than just a soldier. He had a heart that burned with a fire that was rare even among her own people. Lysara felt a strange pull toward him, a mix of curiosity and admiration. She had grown up in a world where power and strength were the only things that mattered. But Jack's courage made her question everything she had been taught as the next trial began. Jack felt a surge of determination. The king thought he could break him. But Jack wasn't just fighting for a title or glory. He was fighting for a chance to prove that humans could stand tall in a galaxy that had written them off. This was only the beginning, and Jack had no intention of backing down. The Gorathian king may have underestimated him. But Jack was about to show the galaxy that humans were capable of far more than anyone ever imagined. Palace. His body had begun to heal from the wounds of the first trial, but the challenge was far from over. The next test would be mental, a trial of intellect, strategy, and quick thinking. He had faced battles, but this would be different. Jack wasn't just fighting for survival now, he was fighting for something much bigger. Princess Lysara had shown him kindness, something he hadn't expected in a world ruled by strength and power. It made him feel that much more determined. To succeed, Jack wasn't sure what had drawn her to him. Maybe it was his persistence in the first trial, or maybe it was the way he looked at her, not as a prize to be won, but as a person, someone with her own hopes and dreams. He had seen the way other men looked at her only as a trophy to claim, but Jack, with his human humility, saw more. Princess Lysara was not just the daughter of a king, not just an object of beauty. She was a person trapped by her father's expectations and the weight of her royal birthright. It was one evening, as Jack trained in the palace courtyard, that Lysara approached him again. Her footsteps were soft, almost hesitant, as if she was unsure of what she would say. Jack noticed her immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly in the dimming light. "Jack," Sarah said quietly, standing a few feet away. "You're training for the next trial, but there is more at stake here than you realize." Jack wiped his brow with the back of his hand, his gaze meeting hers. "I know, but I can't back down now. If I do, everything I fought for, everything you have fought for, will be lost." She paused, her expression filled with a mixture of concern and something else that Jack couldn't quite place. "It's not just about winning anymore. It's about what happens after. The king." Her voice faltered slightly, and she lowered her eyes. "He plans to marry me off to a warlord, a tyrant who has been terrorizing planets for years." Jack's heart tightened. He had suspected that there was more to this than just a marriage challenge. "I won't let that happen," he said firmly, stepping toward her, "no matter what it takes." Lysara's eyes met his, filled with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "You don't understand, Jack. I've been trained to accept this fate. I'm not like you. I can't fight back. I've never known what it's like to have control over my own life." She turned away slightly, her voice growing quieter. "But you have something that I don't. You have the strength to choose your own path." Jack stood there, silent for a moment. He didn't know what to say to that. His life had been filled with choices, but none like the one she faced. He had never been a royal, never had to live under the heavy expectations of a king. He could only imagine the kind of pressure Lysara must feel. "I'm not asking you to fight my battle," she continued, turning back to face him. "But if you win the challenge and free me from this fate, I'll help you. I'll help you with the trials. I'll teach you everything I know about Gorathian tactics, culture, and strategy. We might just have a chance." Jack studied her face for a moment, and then he nodded. "All right, we're in this together then."
Always.
Lysara kept her promise. She gave Jack the knowledge and skills he needed to succeed in the mental trial. She taught him the ways of Gorathian combat strategy, the intricate political games her father played, and the subtle manipulations that the Gorathian royal family used to maintain control. Jack wasn't just learning to fight. He was learning to think like a Gorathian, like someone who had been raised with power. They spent hours in the palace library, going over texts and ancient documents, trying to piece together the history of the royal family. Lysara's intelligence and insight were unlike anything Jack had ever encountered. she was far more than a princess. She was sharp, calculating, and determined to make sure the people she cared about were protected, even if that meant going against everything her father stood for. One evening, as Jack sat at the library table, Lysera stood beside him, her arms folded across her chest. "Jack, there's something else you should know," she said quietly. "What's that?" Jack looked up at her, his curiosity piqued. "The king is not just testing you, he is testing me too. He believes that I will choose a husband who is as strong as he is, someone who can rule by force. But what he doesn't realize is that I've been watching you. You fight with more than just strength. You fight with heart. And that's something the king will never understand." Jack's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, the weight of the challenge felt even heavier. It wasn't just his life that hung in the balance anymore. It was Lysera's future, her freedom. "I'm not doing this just for me," Jack said softly. "I'm doing this for you too." Lysera smiled, a small but genuine smile that made Jack's heart ache with something he couldn't quite place. It was the first time he had seen her smile without the mask of a princess. She wasn't just a royal heir anymore. She was Lysera, a person with hopes, fears, and dreams just like him. "You've already given me hope," she whispered. "Now let's win this." The trials were far from over, but Jack was no longer facing them alone. With Lysera's help, he felt stronger, smarter, and more ready to face whatever came next. The Gorathian king may have underestimated him, but he was about to discover just how dangerous a human with heart could be. The Gorathian king stood at the edge of the grand arena, his eyes cold as they scanned the participants. Jack was one of the few who remained in the challenge, and the king was beginning to wonder if he had underestimated the human. Jack had passed the first trial, a brutal test of strength, and he had gained some measure of respect from the crowd. But this next trial was something entirely different. It would test his mind. In front of the arena stood a massive stone table, covered with intricate puzzles and strange devices. The king, who had been watching from the balcony above, spoke in his deep, commanding voice. "This trial will test your intellect, human. You will have to solve puzzles, riddles, and strategies that no Gorathian has ever failed. If you cannot complete them, you will fail, and the challenge will be over." Jack stood tall, though inside his heart was pounding. He had faced physical battles before, but this was different. This was about his ability to think under pressure. This was about strategy, logic, and the ability to remain calm when everything seemed impossible. He knew the king expected him to fail. As Jack moved toward the table, Princess Lysera appeared by his side. She had been watching from the sidelines, her eyes filled with concern but also hope. She knew this was Jack's chance, and she believed in him. "Remember, Jack," she whispered. "It's not just about solving the puzzles. It's about thinking, like them understanding their mindset. You have to beat them at their own game." Jack nodded, taking a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on him. But he had something the Gorathians did not: a human way of thinking. He had faced impossible odds before, and he had never backed down. Today would be no different. The first puzzle was simple in appearance. It was a series of glowing stones arranged in a circle, with several empty spaces. The task was to move the stones in such a way that the entire circle was filled with the same color. It seemed easy enough, but the stones shifted with a strange magnetic force, making it nearly impossible to move them in the correct order. Jack studied the puzzle carefully, noting the way the stones interacted with one another. He quickly realized the key wasn't just moving the stones, it was about understanding the way they connected. As he manipulated the stones, Jack felt the pressure mounting. The Gorathian audience was growing restless, murmuring among themselves. The king's eyes were fixed on Jack, waiting for him to fail. Minutes ticked by, and Jack's mind raced. He remembered the words Lysera had shared with him. Think like them. He had to think differently to understand how the puzzle worked, in ways no one else had. With a final twist, the stones clicked into place, their colors matching perfectly. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd, but Jack remained focused. One challenge down, and now there were more to come. The next trial involved a series of riddles, each one more complex than the last. The questions were designed to challenge logic, creativity, and intuition. One riddle asked, "What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening?" Jack immediately thought of the classic riddle from Earth, but the Gorathians had added a twist. The answer, they said, must be based on the Gorathian life cycle, not the human one. Jack thought about it carefully. He knew that to win this he had to think in a way that respected their culture, their way of life. He remembered the Goratheon, tradition of growth and maturity, the 3 phases of a Gorathian's life: youth, adulthood, and old age. In their old age, Gorathians used walking sticks, which gave them the 3rd leg. "The answer is the Gorathian life cycle," Jack said, confidently. "In their youth, they crawl, in their adulthood, they walk, and in their old age, they use a walking stick." The king's face twisted in surprise. He had expected Jack to fail this one, but once again, the human had proven his worth. Next came a strategy game of battle simulation. Jack was given a series of holographic troops and had to outsmart the Goratheon commanders, who controlled an army of vastly superior numbers. It was a war game, but Jack wasn't just thinking about winning. He thought about the strengths and weaknesses of his enemies, about how to manipulate them into making mistakes. The game began, and Jack quickly placed his soldiers into defensive positions. The Gorathion commanders charged ahead with overwhelming force, confident that their superior numbers would crush Jack's forces. But Jack had already planned for this. He used the terrain to his advantage, luring the Gorathions into traps and turning their own strength against them. As the simulation reached its final stage, Jack's forces emerged victorious. He had beaten the Gorathians at their own game, outsmarting them with careful strategy and cunning. The crowd watched in stunned silence. They had never seen a human defeat them so easily. The king's face grew darker, his pride wounded. He had not expected Jack to make it this far. He had not expected the human to think like them, to understand their culture and tactics so deeply. The Gorathian king had believed his people were unbeatable, but now there was doubt in his mind as Jack stood victorious in the arena. Lysara's face lit up with pride. She had always known Jack was different, but now the rest of the galaxy was starting to see it too. Jack had proven that he wasn't just a warrior, he was a thinker. He wasn't just fighting for the right to marry a princess. He was fighting for something much bigger. He was fighting for the freedom of Lysara and the people who had been oppressed by her father's rule. The Gorathian king had underestimated humanity, and now he was starting to realize that the human spirit could not be broken so easily. In ways that no one thought possible for a human. The Gorathian king, though still confident in his superiority, began to show signs of unease. The challenge was supposed to be a way to humiliate Jack, but instead, it had begun to reveal just how much the king had underestimated the human. Jack was aware of the mounting pressure. The crowd that once laughed at him now watched with curious eyes. They were no longer sure if they were witnessing the failure of a foolish human or the rise of something unexpected. The next trial was more difficult than the previous ones. This time, it would test Jack's heart and moral compass. King had designed this trial to break him, to force him to choose between his own desires and what was right. The arena was dark when the announcement came. Jack was led into a cold stone room. Before him stood an object covered in a cloth. The king's voice echoed in the chamber, announcing the trial's rules. "This trial is simple," he said. "In this room lies an object that you will find very precious. You will be offered the chance to take it as your prize if you agree to one condition. Refuse, and you will fail this trial. Take it, and you will be stripped of your right to continue." Jack's eyes narrowed. The room was silent, except for the king's voice. He could feel the weight of the situation. "What's the condition?" he asked, his voice steady. "The condition is that you will marry my daughter." "Lysara," the king said, his voice cold and commanding. "But it will be a marriage based on power, not love. You will rule alongside me, and you will control the Gorthion Empire. Together, you and my daughter will solidify your place as the rulers of this galaxy."
X.
Jack's stomach twisted. The proposal was tempting, and he could sense the power behind it. He had faced wars, hunger, and loss in his own life, but this was an opportunity for unimaginable power. He would have everything: control, influence, a chance to change the galaxy. But something inside him stirred. He remembered why he had come here in the first place. He wasn't doing this for wealth or power. He was doing it for Lysera. For her freedom. The cloth-covered object in front of him seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if calling to him. It was the symbol of everything the king promised: wealth, power, and status. But Jack wasn't sure if he was ready to betray his own beliefs. He turned slowly toward Lysera, who had been silently watching from the side. She stood there, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She had no choice but to accept the king's rules. But Jack knew deep down that she would never want a marriage of power. She had shown him that much already. "If I take the prize," Jack said quietly, "I become just another pawn in your father's game. I become part of the very system that keeps people like you trapped." Lysera's eyes widened as she stepped forward. "Jack, don't do this for me. I never wanted to be married to someone just for power. If you choose that, you won't be the man I believe in." Jack's heart sank. He knew what he had to do, and he knew what it would mean. His mind raced as the weight of his decision pressed down on him. The king's offer was powerful, but it came at a cost. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about Lysera. She had suffered enough under her father's rule. He couldn't let that continue. "No," Jack said firmly. "I refuse the prize. I refuse to be a part of this. I will win this challenge, but I won't marry you for power. I won't marry you for control. I'll marry you because I love you." King's expression darkened. "You think love is enough? Love won't rule an empire? Love won't hold the galaxy together?" Jack stood tall, meeting the king's gaze. "Maybe it won't, but it's the only thing that matters to me." Was a tense silence. The king's face twisted with anger, but he said nothing for a long time. Finally he spoke, his voice cold and full of venom. "You're a fool, human. You've passed the first 2 trials, but this one will be your last. You've chosen love over power, but love doesn't have the strength to change this galaxy. Your failure will prove just how weak humanity truly is." Jack didn't flinch. He wasn't going to back down now. He had come too far, and he wasn't going to let the king intimidate him. Lysera stepped forward, her face filled with admiration for Jack's courage. "You're wrong," Lysera said, her voice strong. "Love can change everything. It's the one thing that has always been the most powerful force in this galaxy, even when power and control try to overshadow it. And Jack is right, he won't be controlled by power." The king's fury was palpable, but he was silent for a moment. He had expected Jack to fall into the trap, to choose power over everything else, but Jack had shown him something he hadn't counted on: courage. The king could see that no matter how hard he pushed, Jack would never back down. "You have failed the trial," the king said at last, his voice trembling with rage. "But it doesn't matter. You may have passed the physical and mental challenges, but you will not win my daughter's hand. You will never rule this galaxy. You are nothing but a human." Jack's heart was heavy, but he had no regrets. He had made the right choice. The king's fury didn't matter to him anymore. He had to focus on what came next. Lysera walked over to Jack, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You haven't failed, Jack. You've done something that no one else has ever done. You've shown what true strength is." Jack looked at Lysera and smiled. "Then let's finish this." His heart racing as the king's words echoed in his mind. The trial was not over. In fact, it had just begun. The king was furious, and his anger was about to turn into something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. Lysera was by Jack's side, her hand gripping his tightly. She had always been a symbol of grace and power, but now, in this moment, she was something else, something real. She wasn't just a princess trapped in a royal cage. She was a woman with her own choices, standing beside the man who had refused to be a pawn in her father's game. "Jack, I'm sorry," Lysara whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I never wanted this to happen. My father, he's not just angry, he's dangerous." Jack turned to her, a reassuring smile on his face. "I'm not afraid of him. You don't need to worry about me." But deep down, Jack knew the king was not the only threat in this palace. The king was just the beginning. The real challenge was what would come next. As they walked through the halls, the quiet was broken by the sudden sound of footsteps. A group of Goratheon soldiers appeared, blocking their path. The leader of the soldiers, a tall Goratheon warrior named Karen, stepped forward, his eyes cold and unwavering. "You have defied the king," Karen growled, his voice low and threatening. "For that you must pay." Lysara stepped in front of Jack, her face filled with defiance. "No, Jack hasn't defied anyone. He has only spoken the truth. It's my choice, not my father's, who I marry." Karen laughed, a harsh sound that filled the air. "Your choice? You think your father will allow that? He will destroy anyone who stands in his way. And you, human, ... Karen's eyes narrowed. "You've made a grave mistake by standing with her." Before Jack could respond, the soldiers advanced, weapons raised. The air was thick with danger, but Jack wasn't about to back down. He had come this far. He had fought for freedom, for Lysara's future, and now he would fight to protect both. In the blink of an eye, Jack moved, his reflexes honed by years of training. He knocked the first soldier off his feet, using his agility to avoid the others. The Goratheons were strong, but Jack was quick. He had fought in many battles, but this was different. This was not just about survival. It was about standing up for what was right. The clash of weapons filled the air as Jack fought with all his strength. But as the battle raged on, Jack could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. The Goratheons were relentless, and the soldiers were skilled. He couldn't keep up this fight forever. Lysara, seeing Jack struggle, stepped forward, her eyes flashing with determination. "Enough," she shouted. "Stop. We're not the enemy here." Her words seemed to strike a chord. The soldiers paused, looking at her with hesitation. Karen, still standing at the front, glared at her. "You think you can stop us?" He spat. "You think you can change anything?" "Yes," Lysara said, her voice unwavering. "I can change everything. Hey, the king has ruled with fear for too long. It's time for a new way." Karen looked at her, his expression darkening. "You will regret this." But before he could act, the sound of heavy footsteps interrupted the tense silence. The king himself appeared at the entrance, his eyes blazing with fury. He took one step forward, his presence commanding attention. His gaze flicked to the soldiers, and they immediately lowered their weapons. "Enough," the king said, his voice icy. "This has gone on long enough." Jack and Lysara turned to face him, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something other than confidence in the king's eyes. There was anger, yes, but there was also fear. "You've made a fool of me, human," the king said, his voice dripping with venom. "You've defied my authority. You've broken the rules of the challenge, and now you will pay the price." Jack stood tall, undeterred. "I haven't broken any rules. I refuse to play your game. And now it's time for the truth to come out." The king's eyes narrowed. "The truth. You think you can teach me about truth? I've ruled this empire for centuries. I've brought it to greatness. What have you done but disturb the order? You've built this empire on fear." Jack replied, his voice steady. "You've controlled your people by making them afraid of you. But power like that is built on lies. It's only a matter of time before it crumbles." The king's expression darkened further. "You dare speak of my rule like that? You think I'm afraid of you, human?" Jack took a step forward. "No. I think you're afraid of change. You're afraid of losing control. But the truth is, you've already lost." The king let out a low growl, and for a moment, it seemed as if he would strike Jack down right there. But then something shifted in the air. The king's eyes flickered to Lysara, who was standing next to Jack. Her eyes filled with defiance. Her gaze was unwavering, and in that moment, Jack saw something in her that he hadn't fully realized. Before Lysara was no longer the frightened princess, locked in a gilded cage. She was a woman who had chosen her own path, and she had chosen Jack. The king's anger was still there, but there was a flicker of uncertainty. His empire was built on dominance, but dominance was no longer enough. The world was changing, and even the king couldn't stop it. "You may have won some battles," the king said, his voice quiet but menacing. "But in the end, the war is not over. I will make sure of that." Jack nodded, standing tall. "We'll see about that." Side by side, their resolve stronger than ever. The king's threats had only fueled their determination. The battle for the future of the Gorathian Empire had entered its final phase, and neither Jack nor Lysara was willing to back down. The king, once confident and ruthless, was now backed into a corner. The games had been played, and the truth had been revealed. Now it was time for the final confrontation. As the king strode into the chamber, his regal presence filled the room with a chilling aura. The Gorathian soldiers, who had once stood proudly behind him, now looked uneasy. His strength, his courage, and the way Lysara had spoken out against her father's rule. The tides were changing. The Gorathian king could no longer control the future as he had in the past. "You think you can overthrow me, human?" The king's voice boomed, his anger still palpable. "You think that because you've won a few trials, you can take my place? You know nothing of what it takes to rule an empire?" Jack met the king's gaze without flinching. "I don't want your empire. I don't want your power. I want freedom for you, for Lysara, and for everyone you've oppressed." The king's eyes narrowed. "You think the people would follow you? They are loyal to me, to the power I've built." "They're loyal because you've kept them afraid," Jack replied. "But fear doesn't last forever. It only holds people back. It only builds walls. I'm not here to rule with fear. I'm here to break those walls down." Lysara stood tall beside Jack, her gaze unwavering. "My father's rule is over," she said, her voice strong. "The people will see that. They will see that there is a different way, a way built on trust and freedom, not control and fear." The king's face twisted with rage, but deep down, he knew that things were changing. His grip on the empire was slipping, and he could feel it. The people were no longer afraid of him. They were afraid of what he had become, what his reign had cost them. They wanted something different. They wanted hope. "You are nothing but a fool," the king spat. Taking a step toward Jack, "You think you can change everything with a few words? You think you can make the galaxy see you as a leader? You are nothing but a human." Dor's fists clenched, but he stayed calm. "You may call me a fool, but I'm not the one who's afraid of change. I'm not the one who's afraid of letting go of control. I'm the one who believes that people can rise above fear." The king stepped back, his face turning pale with anger. He was defeated not by force, but by truth, the very thing he had tried to suppress for so long, the desire for change. For freedom, for a better way, was now undeniable. "You will regret this," the king snarled. "You will see that this galaxy cannot be ruled by a human." "I don't want to rule it," Jack said calmly. "I want to help it. I want to see it thrive. I want to see it free." The room was silent. For a moment, and then, unexpectedly, the king dropped his gaze. He could no longer deny what was happening. The people had seen the truth. They had seen that the human Jack was not just a challenger in a royal game. He was something more. He was a symbol of hope, of change. Jack and Lysara had already won without. Another word, the king turned and left the room. His shoulders slumped. The battle was over. He knew his time was up. The empire he had worked so hard to control was crumbling, and all it had taken was one human. One person willing to stand up and fight for what was right. As the king retreated, the doors to the chamber opened, and the Gorathian soldiers filed in. But instead of facing the king's wrath, they now looked to Jack and Lysara. The soldiers who had once served the king with unquestioning loyalty now saw something different in the human who had faced them. They saw strength, courage, and the possibility of a better future. The silence was broken when one of the soldiers, a young woman, stepped forward. "What will happen now?" she asked, her voice uncertain but filled with hope. Lasara looked at Jack and then turned back to the soldiers. Now we rebuild. We make this empire one of peace, one of justice. We will work together to create a future where everyone can live without fear. The soldiers nodded, a sense of relief washing over them. It followed the king because they had no other choice. But now they had a choice. They were ready to follow Jack and Lasara into a new era. As the crowd gathered outside the palace, Jack and Lasara emerged together, hand in hand. The people who had once feared their rulers now cheered for them. They had seen the truth. They had seen that change was possible, that the future was in their hands. Jack looked out at the crowd, his heart swelling with pride. He had come to this galaxy to prove that humans could do what no one thought possible. I had fought for Lasara, for the people, and for the future. And now he had won. Lasara turned to him, her eyes filled with warmth and gratitude. "You did it," she said softly. "You changed everything." Jack smiled, his eyes filled with hope. "No, Lasara, we did it. Together." And as they stood there, surrounded by the people they had fought for, they knew that the future was bright. A new day had begun, and with it, the promise of a better tomorrow.